Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 18th and tonight's movie is The Invisible Man. This movie interested me when I saw trailers of it. This is a movie from 2020 about a woman who escapes the clutches of her abusive, sociopathic boyfriend. But she's not in the clear because later she starts getting stalked by him even though he's supposed to be dead, and somehow he figured out a way to make himself invisible. This doesn't seem to be really based off of the book The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. That's not what happens in the book. I mean, in the book he tries to take over the country, and in this movie he sets his sights a little bit lower. This movie was directed by Leigh Whannell, who did a lot of writing before this. He helped co-write Saw and Insidious with James Wan, so I feel like this guy knows his way around what's scary. I am cautiously optimistic about this movie, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'll get back to you when I'm done watching. Before we get started, this movie talks a lot about abuse, and abuse is a very serious topic. It's something that everybody should take seriously. Even the relationship in this movie, while very extreme, is not unheard of. This type of stuff does happen. I'm going to link an abuse hotline website in the description below. Now let's talk about the movie itself. I'm giving The Invisible Man a 9 out of 10. This was a very well done movie. I think the main source of horror in this movie is the relationship that was implied to have formed between the main character Cecilia, named C, and her ex-boyfriend Adrian Griffin. By the way, Griffin was the name of the Invisible Man in the H.G. Wells book. I say implied because none of the abuse actually happens on screen. C talks about it, and we can certainly extrapolate what went down, but you never actually see it happen. The movie starts out on the night where C runs away, and I mean run away. She drugs Adrian, she has to call a friend, she has to go over a wall. It's like a prison. And C seems to be a relatively strong person, but you can see just how terrified she is of Adrian. After she escapes, she stays at a friend's house, and it's homework for her to try to get the mail, and it takes 2 weeks for her to actually make it all the way because she's just so scared of going outside. They get the news that it was reported that Adrian killed himself. I say reported. It wasn't confirmed. She didn't see anything about it. But his brother says he saw the body, he cremated it, he has the ashes on an urn in his office, so there's no real reason to believe it's not true yet. That is, until weird things start happening in her house. It's actually a lot like a ghost movie, like Hauntings, where things move on their own, or a person will leave the room and then suddenly something will change and then they'll come back. But instead of thinking it's a ghost, or even his ghost in particular, C concludes that he faked his own suicide and has figured out a way to become invisible. And this didn't come out of nowhere. He was a scientist who worked in optics, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. The Griffin from the book was also a scientist in optics. But obviously this seems a little far-fetched to everybody else. So C is tasked with not only staying alive and protecting people that she cares about, but also figuring out a way to prove that her supposedly dead ex-boyfriend is alive, trying to kill her, and is invisible. There were so many points in this movie where I just felt so bad for C. Adrian Griffin from this movie reminds me a lot of the killer in the Poughkeepsie tapes, where not only is he completely just psychotic and murderous, he's also incredibly smart and knows how to get into a person's head. Plus, they played this up a lot in the movie. In any given scene, he could be in it and you wouldn't be able to tell. There's a lot of time where C looks off into the corner, at an empty corner, and you're thinking is he there? Is he not? The horror and tension in this movie is done very well. They don't, go into jump scares too much. There was one at the beginning that was stupid, but, for the most part, it's very, slow and creeping, and it's all about what you think is going to happen, what you're not seeing as opposed to what you actually are seeing. Because clearly he's not content with just, kidnapping or killing C. He, does everything he could to isolate her from anybody in her life, which is a common tactic in emotional abuse. She is pretty much alone in this fight, but she proves to be very resourceful throughout the movie. This is a very grim movie at points, but the action and the pacing and just the character development is all very well done. I can say that it was as good as I was expecting it to be. Now I want to talk about some spoilers. In the original H.G. Wells novel, it was basically like a potion that removed all of his like pigment and then like all of his opacity. But that's not how the invisibility works in this movie. In this movie, it's like this bodysuit made of cameras. They don't even try to BS an explanation for how it's actually supposed to work, so I guess we're just gonna have to suspend our disbelief for that. So the Invisible Man goes as far as attacking the one of the people that she's living with in her safe house and killing her sister in the middle of a restaurant with a knife and then having the knife like land in C's hand. Naturally, everybody believes that she did it and are not very compelled by her "it was my invisible ex-boyfriend" argument, so she gets thrown up in what looks like a mental institution. They have to like strap her down to the bed. There's another conversation with Adrian's brother that reveals to her and the audience that this is something that's really happening and the brother is in on it. Apparently, he really wanted kids and she was taking birth control in secret to try to prevent that, but he must have known about it because he switched her birth control and she's pregnant. And I just realized we never actually figure out what she plans to do with the baby, because she said that she didn't want to get pregnant because then she would never be able to leave Adrian, but there's no, we never see at the end of the movie what she decides to do. She manages to lure out the Invisible Man by attempting suicide and is able to like attack him and like stab him with a pen and make his suit malfunction, which makes him kind of visible sometimes. And then there's this really, really long take of like her escaping the hospital or trying to escape the hospital and the Invisible Man taking out a bunch of different security guards. It was a very long take. The Invisible Man tells big game of taking away everything that she loves if she doesn't come back to him. And she takes that to mean that he's going to go back to the house that she'd been staying at, a friend's house, and kill them. They get there just in the nick of time and are actually able to shoot and kill the Invisible Man. But when the mask comes off, it's not Adrian, it's his brother. And Adrian is found in the house all tied up. So it looks like this was all a setup from the brother. But C does not believe that that's the case. She thinks that this is all one big, even more elaborate setup by Adrian in order to do what he wanted and then have his brother take the blame. She goes to his house and they have dinner and she begs him to please just be honest with me for once, and he keeps insisting no, he is being honest. But then there's a point where she has left the room and suddenly the knife that Adrian is holding raises on its own with his hand and slits his throat, just like how her sister was killed earlier in the movie. And there was security footage of it, and the security footage caught all of it. C comes in acting all distraught and calling 911 for her boyfriend committing suicide, but she goes back a little bit so she's out of view of the camera and starts taunting him about it, implying that she was responsible for this. There were two invisibility suits in the house. You saw her find one earlier in the movie and hide it somewhere that she hid other stuff. And that kind of puts the audience in an interesting situation because we're never actually given confirmation, one way or the other, whether it was Adrian doing all of those things and trying to cover it up by framing his brother, or if the brother was the one doing all those things and trying to frame Adrian. At that moment, it all just comes down to whether or not you believe C. The movie ends with a really long shot on her, and it's just her just standing there smiling, and you see the fact that now she can finally breathe easy, knowing that he is actually dead. And then the movie ends. In this movie, the really scary thing isn't that there's a murderous man who can become invisible. It's this relationship that was formed, just how bad things got. Throughout the entire movie, she just can't catch a break, which makes this movie kind of hard to watch at a few points. But that's part of what makes this movie so effective. I thought this was a very good scary movie. Alright, I'll see you guys tomorrow.